And I'd like to invite Matt to give a welcome from DCJ.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, my camera doesn't look like it's... Oh, there we go. A little delayed. I thought you guys were going to be saved from having to look at my face this morning, but it appears not, so I apologize for that. It's good to see everyone on the call this morning. Just real quick from me, we have finalized our strategic plan, and that is public now, and if it hasn't been sent out to you all yet, we'll make sure to do that. And it's really, I think, a great document that took in input from both internal and external stakeholders over a long period of time. And I think really lays the foundation for the next 3 to 5 years for the division as we move forward in all of our work. But I think it creates a nice framework for the work specifically of OMMIR. And so I look forward to all of your feedback on that final product. And I think it'll be helpful too as this group continues to look at their goals and things that they would like to work on moving forward specific to this office. The other thing I will update on that is specific to this group, let me put it in the chat here. We at DCJ have launched our own podcast to highlight the great work that's going on within our offices as well as with our community partners. And so the first episode dropped this week, and it includes our very own Melody Delmar. So talking about the importance of the work of this office. So I would encourage all of you to take a look at that, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will be posting it on other podcast channels or platforms this week and next, and we'll send out that information. So that's all I have. Happy to take any questions the group might have for me. Otherwise, I can turn it back over to Melody. All right, seeing none, Melody, you're back up.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And I think Lynette had just messaged me that she's hopping on right now. Oh, there she is. Hey, Lynette.
Hey, sorry about that.
No problem. Leah, if you could stop recording. We have Lynette Grable here. I'll let her do her own introduction, but she will be starting us out with an invitation for the meeting.
Do you want me to also?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you always stepping in there, Lynette, to invite us to, your space and everything. And I just wanted to mention that Lynette hosted myself for their Sundance and invited me to learn more about their culture as I'm here in the state and new to our northern tribes. And I really appreciated that honor to represent our office within DCJ and into your home. And that was such an honor. And I'm happy to, always for everyone available on our call for our different tribal nations, that I am also willing to go out to your ceremonies, as you see fit, and to be a part of your community. And that's a big part of what we do in our office within OMMIR. So moving on, I will have Leah do our updates for our last meeting.
Leah temporarily got kicked out of the meeting, and I think she's making her way back right now.
Hi, I'm back. Are we ready for a quick overview of the last meeting?
Yes, Leah, go on.
Great.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm Leah, for everybody that I haven't met yet. I'm the program assistant for the OMMIR office. So just wanted to share a brief overview of what happened last time we met on April 11th. We were honored to have Cindy Hayes, who was a guest with us, to share the story of her son Leon's case and how she continues to advocate for justice for him. So that was really beautiful to have her as a guest. Our director, Matt Lunn, shared a bit about the new strategic plan within DCJ that he just shared now is public. But the three main pillars of that are elevating voices and being responsive to everyone who calls Colorado home. focusing on recruitment and retention of staff within DCJ and enhancing collaboration within public safety. And also he had shared that DCJ's federal funding had not been impacted by the current presidential administration, which was kind of on everyone's mind. So no impact to DCJ. We had a guest speaker, Brian Wadsworth, and Matt just added in the chat that it still hasn't been impacted, the funding, so that's good. Brian Wadsworth joined us, who is the COO of Native Public Media, and did a presentation about the MEP alert, and that's the Missing and Endangered Persons Event Code, and talked about how that's situated within the IPAWS system, Integrated Public Alert Warning System, that administers Amber Alerts and all of those. That was really interesting. He answered a lot of really good questions from the group, and there's a lot more information about that on Native Public Media's website, which is just nativepublicmedia.org. So we were grateful to have that. We heard from our MMIR Task Force of Colorado members, and they talked about some searches that they've participated in, events that they have done, partnerships they're developing, other community level work. They shared about tabling and boothing at a lot of powwows and events, and kind of their focus has been on research and updating data at that time. And Director Delmar shared some ongoing work within our OMMIR office to develop a 3-year strategic plan that's specific to our office within DCJ. And that was begun by gathering input from board members in sort of working groups that we had some meetings on, and some updates about MMIR post. So that's Peace Officer Standards and Training. And I think later today there's some more updates on that issue. But conversations had begun around including collaborating with Mark Pooley, who is a pretty well-known retired tribal prosecutor and the founder of Native Search Solutions. So that is in the works. And that's kind of the main overview. A full recap of the meetings and pretty detailed minutes is available on our website for OMMIR. And those, it takes me a couple days to kind of get prepared, but generally within the week of the meeting being held, those are available online, and that gives a lot more details and links to more information, and all of that information. So, yeah, that's sort of an overview of what had happened at our last meeting. And then I think now Melody has some just OMMIR quarterly updates to share with everyone.
Thank you, Leah.
Yes, I'm trying to pull up my notes, so thank you for that. And go. I lost it. Sorry, hold on one sec. Okay, thank you for that. And we will start out with our new staff introductions. We have Shay, who has come back to us from her incident, and also with Jessica Manrique, who is our new data analyst. And I'd like to start with Shay, if you'd like to introduce yourself to the group and let us know about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Osio delegiga di loeni dagodo she dagodo yone gagati. Hello, everyone. My name is Shay. I am from the Cherokee Nation and the Shawnee tribes of Oklahoma. And I'm a member of the Long Hair Clan, or the Strangers, as they're known. I'm really excited to be joining everybody. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about me and have been elusive for a while, recovering from a skiing incident, but I am back and doing really well with my healing. So thank you for everyone who's been sending your thoughts my way. And yeah, I am just honored to be a part of every bit of the work that you guys are doing. And I appreciate you all for holding strong and continuing to just push through this and on this support. So I look forward to the work of the advisory board. I've met a few of you, but I can't wait to become more acquainted with all of you and get to know how we can best support your work and have a mutual, just a mutual relationship in supporting each other through this really important work here. And I'm going to pass it over to Jessica Manrique, our new data analyst, so she can introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Shay. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. This is my first week on this role, so I'm very excited to be here and to learn from all of you. So looking forward to all the meetings and learning from each one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay and Jessica, and we're really excited to have you on board. And it looks so great to have my full office here on this call for the very first time. So I'm really excited for you all to meet them in person and also virtually. And if you all could put your email in the chat, that would be great. So they're accessible if you want to meet with them or have any additional questions about the role. I'm sure they'd be happy to speak with you or at least meet with you. And so I'm very, very excited. You should see our office. You're welcome here anytime, but the first time they were here all in office, I heard a lot of chatter and it made me so happy because it's been quiet in this corner over here. And so it's wonderful to have them on board and to warm up this space over here in OMMIR, in our corner in OMMIR. And so I'll move forward with some updates for the group. We have pretty much finalized the OMMIR strategic plan. And so this strategic plan reflects DCJ's overall strategic plan, and some of it is specific to the pillars of the overall DCJ strategic plan in terms of our community partnerships, and also with the development of the Community Volunteer Advisory Board. And I've also been working with Ben, who's on the call, our operations manager, to look at our our TTA, I guess, assistance and metrics and how we're going to measure moving forward how our office is successful. Okay, yeah, there's Ben. Yeah, thank you. And so I'm really excited that we have, everyone on board and we're able to utilize Jessica's expertise in data analytics to look at the best ways to move forward, and also we're reviewing other research questions and how we can best navigate what is needed within terms of reflecting data of our office within the work of MMIR within the state. And another update is that we have our full community advisory board, as I had mentioned, and that has taken some time for a number of reasons, but for now, I'm just very happy that we have everyone on board. And so moving forward, we are going to be scheduling, and I'll get into this more in detail later on. We'll be scheduling our Community Volunteer Advisory Board working groups in the next few weeks. So these working groups are going to be working on what they want the advisory board to work on in terms of the next year in line with the strategic plan, and also how they see themselves operating as an entity. And there are certain bylaws that we have to follow according to the state statute. And I'll go more into detail about this later on in the meeting. And we also are still in post-training review by the Community Volunteer Advisory Board. We have, as I mentioned and Leah had mentioned, the the expertise of Mark Pooley, who has been vetted and approved by our leadership again, and also with Jared Torsney, who is going to be, is essentially in charge of that training. So we're going to be updating that and bringing that to the board as well. So I'm excited about that and the way that it's going. And just to give you a little bit of background with Mark, he comes from a law enforcement background. Just to clarify, I think that he's been an excellent partner from my work previously and even now. And he has a heart for OMMIR work and expertise in putting together law enforcement trainings. And I know that Chief Barrow on the call is willing to, as a CVAD member, is willing to be a part of that conversation to give the tribal perspective. So I'm very excited in how this moves forward in streamlining and updating that training for post. And the MEP, the Missing and Endangered Persons Alert, has been, the working group has finalized some solutions, or not solutions, but some recommended strategies for state and federal guidelines and how states want to release that information once the MEP alert goes out and is live in September. And so we have been working with CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and also with CAIAC, our Colorado Information Center, our Fusion Center, to look at the best ways that our state can move forward with that national alert system. And so, first of all, I'm really glad that this alert is going to be live nationally in terms of keeping our families and our relatives safe, and also letting everyone know across the country that, our persons are going missing. And this is a huge step forward in terms of awareness nationally. And so as a state and as our office continues in these conversations in the working group, I would love your input or feedback or recommendations that I can bring forward to the working group. So after this meeting, if you can think of any ways that you can see that moving forward best, please let me know. And just so you know, from the last meeting, the comments that were mentioned was brought forth to the next working group meeting. And so I'm trying my best to make sure that our voice is in the picture in terms of how we navigate the processes with different states starting their own alert systems and us having our alert system. And it's definitely something to navigate, and that will change over time, but at least we have something in place that will ensure that our communities are heard nationally. And our community partnerships continue to move forward in terms of creating and also maintaining our relationships that we had worked on our first year in the office. There are plenty of people who have been engaged and plenty of people who have been wanting to know about the work that we are doing. And I'm very excited about these partnerships in particular and giving educational training. We recently, just this past week, Chris and I gave a training to the ODV SOM conference, and we had talked about how to best give cultural practices, or give well-informed cultural practices to our communities, to people who may work with law enforcement, or to first line direct service therapists or community members, to be culturally aware, especially those who are, the crowd was mostly non-native. And Chris, would you like to say a few more things about that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Melody. So on your behalf, we spoke at this conference. For those of you who aren't familiar with this conference, it is focused on interpersonal violence, both sexual and domestic violence. And so we have a great audience, have about 450 people that were at this conference. As Melody said, many of them are clinicians in private practice. We also had corrections, and actually someone from the Department of Corrections came up to me after the event or after our training and talked about the fact that he had a number of Native Americans in corrections that he was working with and was asking me for some input and guidance on that. So I thought that was excellent. We also had supervision officers, probation, community corrections, others. And so I think it was a great forum to be able to talk and to help them to be more culturally responsive and to understand the limitations of the work that they do, the use of certain risk assessment and other types of tools, the limitations of those in working with Native clients. And it was a great opportunity, I think, for Melody to showcase the work of this council and of OMMIR. I think that people were extremely interested and proud to hear of the work. And Melody, perhaps foolishly, said, "Oh, I'm happy to help any of you in any way." So I expect she'll get a number of phone calls as a follow-up to that. So it was an honor and a privilege to present with Melody. I should have introduced myself prior to starting to talk. I forgive my rudeness. My name is Chris Labana-Frostovsky, and I am the Deputy Director for the Division of Criminal Justice and the son of Oleg and Berkeley Labanov. And they were first generation to this country, and I am second generation. And I have worked for many, many years in tribal communities, helping to expand work in the area of prevention and intervention with interpersonal violence. And so it was an honor and a privilege to talk about my work. I am non-native, but I was talking about it from my perspective as an ally. And Melody was able to share the great work that was done, that she's doing within this council and within her office. So thank you, Melody, for allowing me to speak. I want to give you kudos. I think people were very appreciative and very impressed with the work that Melody is doing. So thank you.
Yes, that was a great, I had a really good time talking with Chris and presenting with him. And I myself had a few different therapists who work with juveniles who are in the system and best ways to keep them connected to their cultural practices. And so it was nice to talk with them and give them recommendations in terms of not only therapeutic modalities, but also making that cultural awareness and connection with their communities. So that was very special to be able to be in that space. And that's because of you all here in this office. And so I thank you, Chris, for hopping on quickly to give your perspective about that meeting, about our engagement in terms of education and being culturally aware of MMIR. And so we are coming up on.
Plus, you met a family member there, Melody.
Oh, yes.
That was ironic.
Yeah. Well, not really, because I always joke, and I think a lot of Navajo people joke that we're everywhere. And so you're always going to meet someone no matter where you're at, no matter what country you're in. And of course, someone was related to me in the room. And so I was excited to meet her. And she works in corrections and juvenile corrections here in Denver area. So it was nice to meet her. And just another example of, why it's important for us as a Native woman, to introduce myself in my own language. And so moving forward, I'd like to invite David Adams, our next presenter, to pull up your slides and introduce yourself, and I'll hand it over to you.
Excellent. I think I shared it. Thank you, Miigwech, Melody, and Lynette, and Leah for having me. Commend you all for having these meetings and doing this work. It was nice just listening to you all talk, and I can hear everybody's kind of compassion for doing this, which I think is super important and incredible. So I'm honored to be here with you this morning. I'm from Upper Michigan, a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, but I've been in New Mexico for almost 20 years. I was a prosecutor, a tribal attorney, and eventually assistant United States attorney and tribal liaison for all the tribes in New Mexico for about 7 or 8 years. And in that work, I definitely saw the areas that were neglected often when it came to federal and tribal law enforcement, not necessarily always being aware of what laws existed in the United States Code that they could prosecute cases under. Example would be domestic assault by habitual offender. If you asked most tribal law enforcement and federal law enforcement for that matter, they would not know exactly what's required to prosecute that case. And it came from the Violence Against Women's Act, and it's arguably one of the most important charges we can have to go after the worst of the worst. And so I think it was always disheartening to me that not everybody knew the law that was supposed to know the law. So I tirelessly trained everybody I could on these areas. And for the last 7 years, I've been in my own practice doing an array of civil rights work and wrongful death work. I do a lot of internal tribal investigations, but then I do a lot of pro bono investigations for families, basically to help provide them closure or get answers for them where I can, which turns into doing this. And so I'm very grateful over the last 6 months that I think I've done 7 conferences in the last 6 months, and it's all been related to this type of work. And they're not just tribal conferences, they're the conferences of crimes against women and the Hope for Alliance. And so it's nice to see the interest kind of grow in this, because collaboration between all 3 of our sovereign governments, I think, is essential to being effective in responding to these issues. And so a lot of what I'm presenting today is going to be focused on my experiences, things that I've learned and researched, and cases that I currently have. And I want to go through some of those cases with you for learning purposes. And so I also just kind of want to be aware and mindful of the fact that sometimes I talk about stuff that's obviously just my opinion and subjective about it. So I don't always expect people to agree with me. But I encourage you all to ask questions. You can stop me, Leah, if somebody's got a question on a slide or something. I'm happy to stop, because I'd like to chat with you all if you have questions throughout this. And rather than just jump into a case or focusing on the law and best practices, I definitely always make it a point to dive down the rabbit hole to the best of my ability, so I can have an understanding as to why we're in this situation in the first place. Because I think it's important to be in order to be effective, I think we have to understand the history regarding some of these issues. And so I'm going to go over with you just a brief timeline of some federal Indian law that impacts these cases, in my opinion, starting with 1886, which is when the Major Crimes Act was passed. And this is the act that gave the federal government this responsibility to have concurrent or exclusive jurisdiction over cases that happen within tribal communities. And the act, Major Crimes, obviously speaks for itself in terms of what kind of cases the feds have jurisdiction over. So murder, sexual assault, various forms of assault, dangerous weapon, bodily injury, drug cases, strangulation, any case that essentially would arise to a felony would be a case that the United States have jurisdiction over. And I think it's just important to really remember that, because up until a few years ago, the declination rate by the federal government is close to 60%, if not more. And that declination rate should scare everybody, because that means that 60% of the most serious cases that happen within our communities are being declined, which should put emphasis on the tribe actually doing more to respond to that, in terms of having protocols and maybe passing laws that would allow for them to have jurisdiction in the felony kind of capacity. So in 1886, that was a big deal, and that responsibility is a big deal. And I heard you all mention funding. Funding is a big deal, because in New Mexico, the Executive Act for the United States requires that there be at least 11 AUSAs in certain divisions in that office for violent crime. And right now they're at 7. And so that 60% declination rate is probably going to get closer to 70 to 80 in the near future, which again puts me in a position where I'm screaming and hollering at tribal leaders quite a bit too, to be ready for this, because to me, crimes against women and children at the rates that they are disproportionately is an epidemic in itself, and it should be treated like that, because I think it's one of the most serious issues that we have in our communities. Lots of turmoil after 1886 to the 60s. Part of that time frame, we had the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act, which was one way of the federal government kind of waving the white flag of saying, we're not going to get away with just complete assimilation at this point. We're going to recognize tribes as having their own sovereign governments and court systems. And so we're going to give this authority for the Bureau of Indian Affairs to have some jurisdictional role and to create boilerplate constitutions and law and order codes back in that time frame for tribes to use. And at the time that may have been necessary, but we were definitely very delayed in the long haul of making changes to those codes and constitutions that initially required the Secretary of Interior to approve. And so I'm always kind of trying to get different tribes to definitely look at their law and order codes to be more effective when it comes to creating a forum for justice for victims. In that time frame as well, we had the Indian Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1968, and it is to some degree a copy of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution and adopted for tribes, but specific to tribes. And a really important component of that act is that tribes are limited to 1 year incarceration for the worst offense. I would say 97% of our country probably does not understand that in itself. And it's a very important factor to me that I analyze all of the time. Because if Jane Doe, for instance, experienced a sexual assault at 12 years old, and if the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the FBI failed to do a thorough investigation of that case, or for various reasons decided to decline investigating or prosecuting that case ends up in tribal court, where that individual that was looking at 30 years is looking at 1 year incarceration. And that frankly should be heartbreaking to anybody, because in that situation, to me, a child or a victim of any sort that's experiencing that has to think to themselves, like, why am I treated differently here? Or why is this the consequence for what I perceive to be the most serious thing that's happened in my life? In addition to that, there's no requirement to have a public defender for individuals that can't afford an attorney. And so that's also a significant component to that act. And at the end of the act, there is an equal protection component as well. I think that's important because I examine that concept of equal protection under the law, under the Constitution, and ask myself, if Jane Doe is in that situation in that court, if they're equally protected by the law compared to our state and federal sovereigns. And the answer is no, in my opinion. 1994, heartbreaking, but amazing. It's heartbreaking to me that we have to have an act called the Violence Against Women's Act in this country. And it speaks volumes about what has happened historically to lead to the point to where violence against women is that out of control that we have to pass legislation to manage it. Very, very important legislation for tribal communities that led to very, very important laws being passed, largely due to advocates around the country advocating and lobbying before Congress. Through that act, some of you may know, comes the ability to have jurisdiction, for instance, over a non-Indian offender who commits a crime of intimate partner violence within the boundaries of the reservation, something that tribes did not have jurisdiction over historically, but through this act would have jurisdiction. And before I keep going, I know Lynette has her hand up, and so and Lynette, if you've got a question, I'm happy to answer it.
Some of the cases that I've worked with on BIA, some of them did receive the max of 3 years. I know you said 1 year. Are you specifically claiming the 1 year for one tribal community through BIA, or are you saying this in general?
So almost there. That's the next one. So all the way up until 2010, we never had the ability to have 3 years incarceration. So part of the Tribal Law and Order Act passed under President Obama's administration was, again, after 100 years of fighting, basically to say, hey, the feds aren't quite doing their job. We need to have more authority in this particular area. We need to have enhanced jurisdiction. And so with that came the idea that we can have 3 years incarceration stacked up to 9 years incarceration for a tribe to sentence somebody in that situation. And I would say of the 570 tribes in the country, I think there may be less than 20 that have implemented that act. So for instance, there's only one in New Mexico of 22 tribes. And why is that the case? various reasons. The Tribal Law and Order Act requires a tribe to adopt rules of criminal procedure, rules of evidence, fair and impartial jury system, a law-trained judge, a law-trained public defender, law-trained prosecutor, and that comes at an expense that there is no funding for. So it's something that each community kind of has to make their own decision on regarding that. And if it were up to me, which it is not, I would say every tribe in the country should definitely implement the provisions of that act because of the high rate of declination and because of the disproportionate rates of violence against women in our community. So that is an option now from 2010 time frame, and just not enough tribes have been able to implement that. And it also requires, of course, if we've got a tribal jail, that tribal jail would have to go through some type of approval certification through the Bureau of Prisons to be a jail or facility that's available to house felony inmates. And these are all like important factors because it always comes down to coordination, collaboration when it comes to these issues, because both the tribe and the federal government could have concurrent jurisdiction in these cases, in determining who charges when and for what charges. How that works is really important. So for instance, when I was my first year out of law school, I never would have said, or my belief then was, if somebody goes into federal prison and gets out, we as a tribe needs to make sure we also have our case go through and sentence that person accordingly, just because of the sovereignty that exists in exercising that sovereignty. I would not say that now because I know what an inmate goes through in the federal prison and what the exit plan is for that inmate in order to reintegrate to the community. And so if we disrupt that process by having them taken from the halfway house and put into tribal detention center, where they don't have the same counseling and resources that they just had finished in the federal system, we might be going backwards in terms of helping them get to the point where they reintegrate. So it's kind of it's one of those strategies that every tribe has to deal with in terms of how they charge. But my best recommendation always is that if there's a case and it's being investigated and the feds haven't charged, community safety should always be a priority. And so if community safety is an issue, then the tribe should ultimately charge all the time. Lastly, I'm going to try to briefly I think that the Women's Voting Rights Act from 1920 is also super important, because when I think of the issues that primarily impact all of our relatives, but a lot of my focus is on the women, because of the stats that are available and the disproportionate rates of violence against women. Like, why is that the case in a situation where, the concept of the mother, whether it be the earth or a community, and ability to bring a child into this world is one of the most important things that can take place in our existence? And how do we get to the point where we have this issue? And I remind myself that it took 160 years of fighting just to have the right to vote for women in this country. And so when I think about the laws that are available and the laws that we had to fight to become available to protect women in this country, we're only 100 years in. And in that thought process, the trickle-down effect of that is that because we have this guardian wardship that existed with the federal and tribal governments, we are kind of delayed in that legislative process as well. Like, you typically won't go into a lot of tribal communities and be able to just have a legislative process where you can propose a strangulation law that you're going to pass, or a Victims' Rights Act. And so we kind of have to make that something that is more available to our communities, so we can advocate for changes in the legal system where necessary. So just a brief, I think that history of federal Indian law is important, just like the history of the boarding school system is extremely important to remind us that this is not a new concept of having missing and murdered indigenous people in our communities, because that is essentially what happened through the boarding school process. And I think it's really important to note as well, because if you've been ever prosecuted or investigated these cases or work with victims, and you have situations where somebody does not want to be a part of the process at all in any way, shape, or form, certainly there's a whole list of reasons why somebody may not want to be part of that process. One thing that I've learned in doing hundreds of thousands, if not thousands of cases over time, is that if I meet with an 11-year-old that was sexually abused by a family member, and that case is being investigated federally and it's being charged federally, you may meet her grandma who was not sitting on the same side of the courtroom of her because she herself may have been a victim of some type of childhood trauma that she was never able to talk about. And I've had those situations happen often where I'm sitting there with somebody that had gone through a horrible tragedy, and the mother of that person is sitting there going in tears themselves saying, I didn't know what to do because I had experienced this myself and there was no recourse for me either. And so this generational trauma that exists is very real, and it plays a significant part of this process, especially in terms of the failures that systemically we have had as institutions and government entities in responding certainly creates a situation where a vulnerable population becomes even more vulnerable, creating the crisis that we have now. So for me, I guess it's a long story and a picture that gets to us. This why we have this crisis. And I think one important factor in looking at it and analyzing this is that there's stats out there that will show that in the MMIR type of related cases, that 80% of those missing or found murdered had also experienced some type of violence in their lifetime prior to that. And my worry and concern is always, how was that violence responded to? And typically you will find out that it wasn't responded to properly. And in those situations, that creates a situation where you have a disconnect with your community, you have a disconnect with law enforcement because they maybe had failed to investigate something, and you probably are in a situation because of these adverse experiences of coping in a way that might not always be healthy. So it could be a bad partner, it could be abusing drugs or alcohol, other criminal activity. So these are issues that we created and failed to respond to, which is why I'm super critical about how we respond to violent crime now, and super critical across the board about the roles that people have in government entities to do more about it. And a lot of this is about who does what and when. And so we're going to kind of navigate that towards the end here in terms of how the multidisciplinary response to these issues is super, super important. As of late, even though I could sit here and be critical of several different federal agents in certain cases, or state officers in certain cases, or tribal officers, it's across the board where I'm not just holding out saying this person's, this sovereign's doing perfectly. I've tried to be constructively critical in this process or offer solutions. And so most of the trainings I do, especially if there's tribal leaders there, I always provide either laws or a resolution. And for instance, every tribe, in my opinion, should have a resolution that simply acknowledges this crisis. Therefore, every time a new tribal council comes into office over a year or every 2 years, that part of that invocation into that position is a discussion of these issues that impact our communities. And if we don't highlight the fact that 1 out of 3 women will be sexually abused or face some type of domestic violence in their lifetime, then we're not actually doing enough to respond to it. It should be a discussion that happens every single time new leadership comes into play, so we can talk about what can be done better within our own community. And an example would be if our law and order code does not have strangulation on the books, and a judge or a prosecutor gets that particular case before them and it's charged as a battery against a household member, that does not tell you the risk of intimate partner homicide in the future. And so if we can do these simple fixes to acknowledge the seriousness of some of these crimes, we'll better educate ourselves, the community, and better protect victims of these types of cases. And so huge proponent of just, I can't stand law firms around the country that charge $500 an hour to pass laws or to try to propose law and order codes when these laws already exist in the books. The strangulation law, for instance, written in the United States Code, is one of the best written strangulation laws in the country because it doesn't require visible injury. And it shouldn't, because there's medical studies to show why there might not be visible injury in a strangulation case. And so this kind of concept should apply. I always say that we should be passing these laws and copying laws from the Violence Against Women's Act, because that's what they're there for, is to protect our community members. Jurisdiction is obviously a really significant component to these cases, because a lot of these cases could be a situation where Jane or John Doe was within the boundaries of the reservation initially, but then maybe they went missing off of the res, or maybe they were taken from the res. And so it really creates a situation of having to examine the details about where the case may have originated in the first place. And for the purposes of really analyzing state, federal, or tribal jurisdiction, I mean, these are the 4 questions you're asking yourself each time. You know, where did it happen? Who's the suspect? Who's the victim? And what did they do? For instance, if it's a non-Indian that's within the boundaries of the reservation that commits a victimless crime, such as a DUI or disorderly conduct or intoxication, you know, that's the exclusive area of state jurisdiction. That has expanded a little bit due to Castro Huerta decision that basically gave the state additional authority over certain crimes of domestic violence when it comes to non-Indians, and having a tribal member be a victim. It's a whole other discussion in itself, but that is kind of expanded over time. And my, you know, when doing trainings, I do a lot of trainings with the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, and we go to each tribal community here, basically, that's willing to do the training, and we present to them best practices and protocols and all that stuff. And the one thing that I would say is a simple best practice that I would incorporate anywhere for every tribe is that if there's a case that is involving one of our tribal members and it's referred to as an MMIR case, that we should have an advocate from that community, regardless if it's in the state's jurisdiction or elsewhere, to look out for that community member's case, you know, to be that ears, the voice for the family. And it is a person from our community. We should care about that person being missing from our community. And so I think having that contact is essential. And the subjective side to this is that when I was a federal prosecutor, the best cases I had where Jane Doe really made that leap to becoming a survivor versus staying in this concept of being a victim of a violent crime, but really healing from it, came because there was a tribal advocate that understood the culture, understood her, what she came from, what was going on. And that building of that relationship, I think, is everything in being, you know, trauma informed in how we move forward. So I just think having tribal advocates involved in these cases is essential. Already discussed that. You know, and I think that, for instance, if you went to Laguna or Acoma, they're just in the beginning stages of putting these protocols together. And if you don't have a protocol in place, it's going to be tough for somebody to figure out what the first steps are right away. And so I just think that in terms of all of our communities, that we should definitely have a protocol in place. I'm happy to share it. I'm sure Melody has Operation Lady Justice protocol that kind of is a template that's 30 pages long with different information that gives you different ideas as to what you can do under these circumstances. And so part of that is really, you know, gathering of information, of course, and having our community members understand why we have to get very thorough about the information that we're trying to gather, and how important that information is to get when it comes to the beginning parts of the case. And so depending upon how old the case is, it may change some of these factors, but, you know, generally speaking, these are things that I want to get from a family, as much of this information as possible right away from the beginning. And always, you know, there should be a family member involved, kind of as a spokesperson for the family. And again, a victim advocate side to it, I think, is essential. Just even in the reporting stage itself, that's how quickly we should have an advocate involved. Why? A whole array of reasons, but one area that we have collectively failed at as a society and as tribal and federal governments especially, is that the adverse experiences for children when it comes to any type of traumatic case that we have, if you've got a DV, a sexual assault, or a battery involving an intimate partner that took place in somebody's home and there's children, there's a score that goes towards those children regarding that kind of trauma that they've endured. And obviously, it doesn't take much to have had that trauma scale go pretty high pretty quickly. And in that, when I think of those trauma scales and how we have failed to properly identify them as victims of self in the system, we fail to provide them the services they need. So they end up having these issues when it comes to, how do I cope with this? Does drugs or alcohol become part of that? Do you drop out of school? Do you early childhood or early pregnancy, teen pregnancy? And so a whole list of things that come from not getting the services you need. So in all the cases that I have that I've investigated, every Jane Doe had children. And so if we are not getting them the services they need, we're almost compounding the situation, because at some point in time, we're going to see one of those kids in juvenile delinquency court, unless they happen to be the lucky one that was able to figure it out. And I think it's a very real situation, a real problem that kind of contributes to our cyclical realm of violence within our community sometimes. I provided the link for psychologytoday.com just as an example of something where I would talk to families, especially depending upon how rural their community is. You oftentimes will have some type of distrust within having a counselor from within the community be their counselor for whatever reason it might be. And so do they have the ability to travel 60 miles to go to a Tuesday appointment for their daughter? Probably not. It's very difficult. And so you don't just give up in the world of trying to find somebody. COVID, one of the benefits from it was, if there is such a thing, was having Zoom meetings and calls. And so Psychology Today, I could go in there and I could type in, what type of counselor, what gender, what kind of insurance I have, whether or not I have insurance, and then get a list of people that would be available for remote counseling by Zoom or telephone. And it's better than doing nothing at all. So highly encouraged the use of trying to find some resources for anybody involved in these cases. You all probably have this stuff too, but sometimes just having a flyer ready to go that can be easily filled in is super important in the beginning as well. And there seems to be a lot of our communities don't have this information readily available to them. So we provide these at every one of our trainings and kind of just give them tips on how to fill out the forms. Use of social media, kind of the same thing. I think one factor that's super important is obviously if there is a law enforcement investigation actively taking place here, that how social media is used should be done with coordination with law enforcement, versus having somebody take control of Facebook and sending out stuff, because law enforcement may have some type of investigation they're doing that could be jeopardized by by sharing certain information. I'm trying to think of Lynette's organization of Not Our Native Daughters. I'm sorry for not saying it right, but I follow them, and you see the wide dissemination of these cases, and it's really pretty incredible to see that information shared really quickly. And I think that's definitely important. Sometimes getting some of the biometric information is difficult in situations, because nobody ever wants to start giving away things that they believe is going to, include their DNA and all that. But that might be a very important component to having a thorough investigation done. There are some incredible organizations out there that put together investigations just based upon biometric information and help solve cases from that. And so it's an important component too that I think needs to be part of our discussions with family early on as well. And I'm going to, I think I've got about 20 minutes or so. And I just wanted to kind of discuss a more recent case with you that I've been working on. And it involves a focal point of really having a multidisciplinary approach to these cases. And Linnell was a 34-year-old mother of 4 kids from the Pueblo of Jemez, and a walker, somebody walking their dog in the community of Bernalillo, which is about 15 minutes out of Albuquerque saw what appeared to be a body in a ravine in that area and called it into the police. And that area is known as a border town area. And you know, there's a history of border town friction around the country, and somewhere in the northern areas especially, it can be significantly worse when it comes to the history of racism and prejudice when it comes to border towns, and it's reflected in the work or response to violent crime historically. And so it's kind of an important component to just understanding why some of these issues arise. In this particular situation, her body was found in the ravine that was within Bernalillo Township, and about 100 yards away from the res. And it wasn't the same reservation that she was from. It was a different one. And so that's how close she was to the res, and that's where her body was found. And some important factors were that her phone was found on the reservation about 100 yards away from her body, and 400 yards away from her phone was a backpack. And it was her backpack with some of her belongings in there. So that was found on the res. And there was a altered rock that they also made mention of as well. There's a pen there. And ultimately, I didn't, show all the pictures that I do have. There's some of their very, very awful pictures. I mean, first thing that I would mention to you is that she was 97% naked. She had her pants down below her ankles, and her bra was above her breasts, and shirt was gone. And so mostly naked and decomposed from the water, even though it had been less than 2 weeks, but there was quite a bit of decomposition. And I noticed pretty quickly right away that, there was never a crime scene evidence cone placed anywhere, and was concerned as to how the case, when I was first reading the report, what was taking place here. Because what had happened is the mother of the deceased had contacted me, unfortunately, 2 years after all of this happened, because what had happened to her was basically an investigator from the state came to her house and said, your daughter had a little meth in her system, and she may have fallen in this ravine and drowned. We don't know exactly how, but she had a little meth in her system. And so it made the mom believe that's how her daughter died. And they shared with her the disc of the photos that the mother didn't look at, and a family member ultimately said, you should talk to somebody about this just so you can understand it. And so when I started looking at it, I knew right away that there was major issues in the case. And I actually had been presenting at a conference in Dallas and talked to an attorney from the Department of Justice there, who connected me to a forensic pathologist out of a different state who happens to work for a law enforcement agency that ultimately goes to all crime scenes that they have where somebody's found an unattended death. And the first thing he told me was that this was a sexual assault and homicide until proven otherwise. And so at this point in time, the case was never investigated as such and had been closed for that long. And I think what bothered me, well, many things that bothered me in this was that rather than take that cell phone and do a forensic download of that cell phone was immediately turned back to the family. I think that had some of the best evidence that we could have had in this case in terms of who her last contacts were and who she was exchanging messages with or what phone calls she may have made. And the autopsy findings also had a couple really important factors. One being that all of her fingers were disarticulated at the same joint. And even though they mentioned that as to being interesting and an unusual finding, if you do the research regarding somebody that's found in a ravine or the water and whether or not their fingers just disarticulate at the same joint, it doesn't happen. And certainly you can go, well, animal predation could have happened as well, or maybe some fish. Not I mean, you will not find a piece of literature for that where this type of injury is found, and how that they completely ignored that as being a sign of foul play is beside me, especially when you know that the lungs and the weight of a lung of somebody that drowns is going to be over 1,000 grams versus 175 to 140 grams. The hyoid bone was unstable on palpation, so the bone that is oftentimes investigated in terms of a possible sign of strangulation was unstable. You look up at the medical literature for that. It definitely looks, it says, the first thing it says is you should investigate it for potential blunt force trauma or strangulation. Doesn't mean that's what it was, but certainly is a factor that should have been considered in this investigation, and it wasn't. Looking at all of this now, it still kind of blows my mind that these things were just completely ignored. And ultimately, we couldn't sue the Office of the Medical Investigator here, even though I wanted to, for a breach of their care when it comes to their duties. And that's because of the deadlines that are required to have notice given to government agencies for these types of things. So these were the general findings from that particular case. And, you know, some of them, one of the biggest tips of advice I could give to anybody in law enforcement is, if you have, you know, policies and procedures or SOPs, whatever it might be, they usually will give you, you know, what you need to do in the event that something like this happens. And for instance, just collecting evidence, properly tagging it, placing it into evidence, any death of suspicious nature. And so none of this happened. And so I had, you know, it's hard to sit there and say, well, if none of this happened, what does that mean? You know, like, why does that happen in its first place? I mean, your guess could be as good as mine. Sometimes I suppose somebody could just have an off day. This felt like what I would describe as to be kind of a historical border town type of investigation that you don't take seriously because it's somebody from a different community. And it definitely felt that way here. I ultimately, we'll go over it real briefly, but I ultimately filed suit against Bernalillo Township for civil rights violations and for violations of the State Tort Claims Act. Not sure what it's like in Colorado, but for at least New Mexico under the Tort Claims Act, we have some decent case law regarding a duty to investigate for law enforcement. So that otherwise discretionary duty here that you would have as law enforcement, there's a case that basically says if you fail to investigate, putting the overall community of New Mexico in danger by failing to investigate, you know, you can have a tort claim for that particular case. And our argument here was, yes, of course, the failure to investigate here created a risk and a danger to the rest of New Mexico because nobody was ever charged or investigated. So part of our lawsuit as well has somebody named as John Doe in the lawsuit, which is the person that we basically should say should have been investigated. Now, if you do discovery in this stuff and do kind of a historical look at this particular law enforcement agencies and their response to cases involving tribal members is not good. So our deprivation of rights / equal protection argument is focused on their historical failures to properly train law enforcement for these cases, that they knew that they weren't properly responding to in the first place, and how those historical failures to properly train law enforcement officers led to the deprivation of Linnell's rights here, because we're letting perpetrators go over and over again. Honestly, didn't think I was going to win that argument for the motion to dismiss in state court, and we did win that argument. They found that we had enough evidence to show that there were historical failures for them to do more responding to these types of cases. And just a real short, easy fix, you know, when I was a prosecutor, I was on all of these things. I was on a multidisciplinary team meeting monthly, just like you all are. I was on an unattended death review team. I was on an intimate partner review team. So I went to UNM Hospital and I would go over all of the cases involving tribal members where there was unattended deaths. And I basically would start identifying which ones were not being investigated right. And if that would have happened here, you know, I have to believe that somebody at a table would have said, wait, what happened? You know, I should also note in that particular case, there was tribal law enforcement from Santa Ana, which is where her backpack and phone was found there. And I should also note that the Bureau of Indian Affairs showed up to the damn crime scene and literally said, oh, it's not who we thought it was. We were looking for somebody from a different tribe that was missing. That's not her. And that was the extent of their investigation there as well, which I definitely think is was a, you know, a violation of the Federal Tort Claims Act and her civil rights. But I'm definitely not going to win that, because we're definitely trying to give a blanket authority to law enforcement to get away with that kind of stuff, and the federal side to it, and it's a very difficult fight. So I just think at bare minimum, having these cases discussed as they arise, and having these teams put together is essential at catching these cases from falling through the cracks, just like this one. And so, you know, I kind of went over it. I guess a couple highlights is that, you know, I'm definitely, I definitely carry my own, like, I'm very angry at a lot of things when it comes to these cases, and I'm angry at a lot of institutions that have failed in responding to it. And so I'm always trying to figure out, well, who is this? Why did this happen? Who was this guy that was involved officer wise? And about 2 or 3 months after this case here happened, Jeremy, for instance, committed a DV, and within 2 months of that had 2 protection orders filed against him from 2 separate women. And then got charged in a different civil rights matter when he drew his gun on somebody that was rushing their dog to the hospital. And so, at least from the angle of going, I kind of knew it. I mean, I could tell from how badly you did this investigation that you're prejudiced, or either you just don't have the compassion for this type of work. And if this work doesn't pull at your heartstrings and doesn't make you want to go home and cry, then maybe it's time not to do it, because it is very difficult work, and it requires a lot of your heart and soul to be able to do it right. And I think as civic servants, you know, when we work for these types of agencies, that we have an unbelievable duty, important duty, to do our best to protect general public and to provide justice for victims. And so my thing is if it's not being done, then I need to hold somebody accountable so it doesn't continue to happen. And so that was the goal of this particular suit. And I always try to meet with the government entity thereafter. And I even offer free training to them and say, hey, listen, I hope that part of this lawsuit will lead to certain changes within your organization, and offer that, but rarely do they take me up on it. And just, you know, I recently have done the same thing against the United States. And I'm shaking my head because I'm going to probably lose this argument here, and which is really sad, because ultimately this is the same case that essentially took place with the FBI and Larry Nassar, the gymnast coach for Michigan State, because, you know, the 100 gymnasts pursued the FBI for the FBI's failure to investigate reports of sexual assault that led to damages to other gymnasts, and they paid a boatload of money, over $100 million, to resolve those claims. And if you look at the reports regarding the FBI in recent years and their systemic failures to respond to indigenous cases within our communities, those failures would break your heart as well. And when I still see them happening, the only way to raise my voice about it, unfortunately, is to draft the lawsuit and file it. And their argument here, which is a case that they simply took a report on and did not respond to, leaving the family without an advocate, without any information, and without turning that report and interview over to the tribe. It caused nothing to be done for over a year. And there's a provision in United States Code that requires a federal agency to share their investigative work product with state and tribal law enforcement when they aren't taking the case. And that drives me crazy too. because that couldn't be written more clearly. And that was written that way because historically speaking, you could never get that report from the FBI when it came to the cases that they were doing. And so the response to that was, how do we take that case when you all won't share the evidence from it? And Trauma Informed would let you know that you would not want to put a family or Jane Doe through a second interview if you already have an interview. Common sense, collaboration, working together. I mean, to me, it was just, it's really disappointing. The victories that came from this case thus far is that for a year and a half, they didn't turn over their forensic recorded interview of this family. And when we filed the lawsuit, they finally did. So now at least tribal law enforcement has that. They were able to file their charges, and it actually turned into community discussions regarding these issues for the first time. So I've actually been out to the community. I continue to work with the family in this matter. And, you know, even though we're not always winning, so to speak, every bit of effort of opening your ears and eyes to these issues and just listening to families that have gone through these things is part of that journey to healing. And I find that it's very important to me. It's exhausting to do it. It's probably as often as you all do too. You know how exhausting it is, but it definitely changes lives and means the world to people. So just some strategies that I've been using to try to make changes. And, you know, I, as an attorney that, you know, obviously is a huge supporter of tribal sovereignty and has, you know, went to school for federal Indian law, like I never envisioned myself ever suing, you know, tribe or a chairman, and for various reasons of immunity. But when it comes to those failures too, changes will not happen within our community unless we start holding people accountable. And so if a medicine man, like this situation was the actual suspect in the case, and you allow that person to continue practicing that type of important tradition within our community, we're only causing harm to people. This young lady was 12 years old. There was other victims involved. And if we do not give her a forum to get recourse for these things, then we are causing more harm than we are good. And if that doesn't change, then that means I have to sue somebody, because unfortunately, that seems to be the only way you can get people to open their eyes when it comes to their personal accountability for these types of issues. And I definitely am done kind of listening to, I mean, I've been doing this a long time to where I do a lot of outreach, and if I do outreach over and over to an area that simply just didn't make any changes, at some point in time, when you see somebody's life ruined by their failures, it just leads to you to doing the right thing, which is taking them to court with the hopes that people do better in the future. You know, even though I feel the burnout of all this work, I say this 100% truthfully, that I have hope every day because I see changes happening. Just watching your meeting start off this morning to me was just like, gives me hope. Watching a community have community members get together to discuss these issues gives me hope. Having a family be brave enough to tell their story gives me hope. And so I hope that you all find that same type of hope in the work that you do, because it is very, very, very hard work that undoubtedly has vicarious trauma to it. And so taking care of yourselves in that process is super important. So I tried to give you all a large amount of information in short time, and hopefully some of it is new or beneficial to you. And my email number is there. You can always reach out and ask questions if you ever have anything you can help on. So that being said, I'll open it up if anybody does have any questions right now.
Can we just say a respectful swoon to everything that you just said? And we are all fangirling how amazing you are over here. And it's, you know, it's because you're Ojibwe, because there is one way, the Ojibwe. And so we want to know if you're licensed to practice law in Colorado and what it would take to get you to relocate here.
Well, Miigwech, thank you. That was very, very nice. And you know what? I am not, but I believe that reciprocal, there's some reciprocity that I actually could do, because I would like to do some work up there, and I love Colorado. It would be on my list for places to move in the future. But if there's ever anything I can do, there's ways where I can pro hoc Viche up there on certain matters through another attorney. And I see Melody shared some information too, some hotlines there. And I'm actually on the Strong Hearts helpline as well, which is also just sad because every month we're looking at losing 40 advocates around the country. Again, you're just reminding ourselves why it's so important that we constantly are driving our leadership into recognizing these gaps of responses that are going to take place in the future that we have got to be ready for. But anyway, thank you very much for your words.
Yes, thanks, David. And myself and David have had many heart-to-heart conversations about, or we have said, I don't have to say much more than that. I know you understand what's, the complexity and the frustration. And also, I like that you ended on the hope of what's to come. And, I think moving forward, that's definitely something that we are, moves us forward in this work. And I'd like to ask if you have a question, just to make sure we get everyone who has a question heard. So if you could put your hand up in the raise hand feature, and I see Raven has a question.
Not so much a question, but Huju, David, Raven Payman, Adishnaka, Nin Gagun Dodam. Before I get into the semantics, I have to ask who's your family from a fellow Sault Ste. Marie, because I want to make sure I can claim you as my cousin after this presentation you just gave.
So are you related to Aaron Payment by chance or no?
I am. Aaron's my cousin, as are the Boolies.
Okay, yeah. So I worked with Aaron years ago. I interned for the tribe, so he was the chairman when I interned with the tribe.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and family-wise, our name is aunts going back into the role, but my last name Adams now. My dad's from Eagle Clan, and kind of weird situation that I'll save for a different story. My dad was a high school dropout that grew up in a horrible way, and so grew up more in Wisconsin, but then eventually made his way to the UP and kind of connected with the roots. And so he worked for the tribe for about 15 years too. So yeah, it's awesome that you're from there. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. So Melody was joking around that Navajos are everywhere, as are Ojibways, apparently. So anyways, nice to meet you. One of the things I kind of wanted to point out from your presentation, though, and hopefully for our non-native participants, is the intersectionality of this work. And you mentioned Nassar and the terrible things that he did. The MMIR Task Force of Colorado actually did an intersectional work with the Colorado legislature on the Childhood Sexual Abuse Accountability Amendment in the 24 and the 25 legislative sessions. And one of Nassar's survivors actually came to support that and testified. Unfortunately, partisan votes tanked that bill because they sided with the Catholic Church and insurance companies, lobbyists, so we weren't able to pass that through. But that work affects MMIR heavily, as it does with Indian boarding school survivors. So these are just pieces that we still continue to confront in this work. So I just kind of wanted to tie that in for our other friends on the call right now.
And I'm glad that is a significant issue that I honestly have not always been involved in kind of state politics as much as I should. I'm always helping pass different laws when it comes to these issues. But when I started paying attention to 100 times the amount of lobbying efforts being put forward from the church and insurance groups like that versus what we are putting forward, there's no way to win. That amount of money to meet is just unbelievable, and it scares the living heck out of me.
Yeah, well, thank you, Miigwech.
Yeah, thank you. I think Delilah had a question, if there was a Delilah.
Yes, nice to meet you. My name is Delilah Lopez. I'm an enrolled member of the Chippewa Cree tribe from Montana. Awesome. And I just wanted to kind of talk about like your connection when you mentioned the boarding school history, because I'm a researcher on that subject. And a lot of times we talk about it as being like a historical harm, but it's a continual harm, right? And we see that coming into missing, murdered Indigenous women. And I noticed with the case that you talked about with the woman whose death was disregarded, right? And I think due to the drugs being in her system, it made me think of the case that's going on here in Colorado with the CU Boulder student who was found dead up in the mountains, and the family now is having to do their own investigation, hire their own investigators to kind of look into the case because it's so suspicious. And law enforcement was just like, she went up there and it's just kind of like accidental, or I think they stated that she like overdosed on her prescriptions because she was suicidal. And I think like looking at the case that you just discussed like shows how, I think like you kept saying like it just like appalled you how like they didn't do the right investigation, but I think it's on purpose. Like we know it is, and we know that there's just not there's no compassion for us. And I think like as a mother of 5 children, I have 2 daughters. I have 7 sisters. Like we know like when we go out or we do things, we have to be really careful, because if something happens to us, there's not going to be this urgent need for justice or investigation. And so I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that case. It was hard to see that the family had to go through that. And I'm just thankful that you were able to get them some kind of justice.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with you about everything you've said. And it's good. The example sometimes I give is that, you know, we drive by the corner sometimes of maybe a lady there asking for money, and we immediately think to ourselves, like, how come you don't have a job? Well, get a job. And if you really start to do the research and you look at how much trauma it takes to put somebody in that situation, you start to go, gosh, we did this, you know, we did this. Which is, I mean, and the funding issue is so significant, and I've offered to all of our crisis centers here to take the most serious protection orders they have, because legal aid can't do them right now. And so we took 4 in the last week just for DV and sexual assault cases, because zero money, and they want to leave. And as all of us know, when somebody makes that decision, it's the hardest decision of their life, because intimate partner homicide increases by 60% just leaving. And it's so important that we just have more advocates doing the work that you all do. So thank you.
And then another question I had, I'm not sure if anyone can address this, but I was wondering about like victims who are eligible to be enrolled but are not enrolled. As I stated before, like I had a sister who was adopted, and we now have contact with her, and she's not able to get enrolled because her foster mom actually changed her birth certificate to state that she was her biological mother, which I think is illegal. I'm like, how did that happen? And so and our mother was the one who was, you know, enrolled at our tribe. And we are of mixed race because my mom, you know, married my father, who's Mexican American. And I was just wondering, like, does that also leave victims vulnerable because they don't have that status of being enrolled yet? Like, I kind of think of ICWA, right, where there's children who are eligible to be enrolled, and sometimes caseworkers don't ask, like, is this child eligible to be enrolled? Therefore, they're not protected by ICWA. Does that also move into this role of missing, murdered Indigenous women, where there could be victims who are maybe in group home, foster home, who are not enrolled, and then therefore are not getting this protection that we have in these circles?
Another great point. And I would say, I don't know all the answer to that, but I definitely know that definitely plays a factor. And sadly, the factor where it plays most is within our own community, because of what services might be available to that person that they're otherwise not offering because of enrollment issues. I've seen that that's changing over time, because what you described, that wouldn't change jurisdiction for the feds, because there's law that supports just being eligible for enrollment, along with kind of having some community connection is enough. But separately and apart from that, I would look at that birth certificate for you stuff, and I would see if there's a way to get that changed, if as a separate matter. But yes, it's definitely an issue, especially when it comes to a lot of our entities that might have services in the city for enrolled members, but excluding specifically not enrolled members. And so maybe First Nations won't take in somebody because of that issue. And so I can't remember what the word that we call it is, but it's some type of like internal discrimination we have within our own communities that needs to be, worked on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we need more lawyers. We need more students.
No kidding. Well, the good news to that is I also agree that our law schools have not been talking about this issue enough, and which breaks my heart, because we would have more lawyers focusing on protecting and creating a very good court system within our community. And but I've, in the last couple months, I've been to Yale, University of Michigan, University of New Mexico, and Arizona to talk to students, and so like that's growing too, and that gave me hope. Monica Snowbird, I think.
Yeah, I just when we talked about state legislation, just this last session, we were able to advocate to get the recognition of tribal court order bill passed, where up until then, the state of Colorado didn't automatically honor or participate in any tribally issued court orders. And so now they will honor that for all 574 federally recognized tribes. So if there's someone in New Mexico that has an outstanding warrant, Colorado can now contact them and actually work to extradite them back to the state of Colorado. And I didn't point it out when we were working on this bill because I thought we might get pushback, but it doesn't just mean tribal members. So if there are non-tribal members who have an arrest warrant out for domestic violence or sexual assault or anything under VAWA, the state of Colorado can now extradite them back to New Mexico and any other state.
That's pretty remarkable. And
then just making sure New Mexico knows about that, because in Colorado, we're really bad about telling people when we pass laws that impact tribal communities in other states. Like we also have the an ICWA supportive bill where tribes can certify their own foster homes in the state of Colorado, but nobody does it. No one has done it, and it's been in. What did we do that, Raven? Like 3-4 years ago, I think. And then also when you're talking about going after MEs and the coroner's offices, that's something that our task force runs into constantly here in Colorado. And again, just this in 2024, they just passed a law that for a community of over 150,000 folks, the coroner actually has to be a medically trained pathologist. Other than that, they just had to be over 18, have a valid driver's license, and pass a background check. So we do have a lot of cases where we would like to maybe brainstorm with you eventually about how to address some of these death certificates that say someone died from cirrhosis, but ignored the blunt force trauma to the head, or the fact that they had to have a closed casket because of all the trauma to the body, but the cause of death is considered unknown or natural causes. So yeah, we're all excited about all the things you're doing. Super excited.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that might be it.
Yes, thank you so much, David. I will always appreciate you and being a partner in this. And like you said, we need each other in this work. It's very difficult and very hard, and very few people understand how challenging it is and how much of their heart it takes. And that's something that I always say. And, my presentations is that, and to people who are involved in this work, is that it's people who really care and who are passionate about our Native communities. And often that falls on us as Native people. So I appreciate that, David, and I'm looking forward to staying connected with you. And thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you so much, all. Good luck with everything, and we'll be in touch soon.
Okay. All right, well, I think, did he leave his information in the chat? I think he left it up on the screen, but if someone could share his information, that would be great. I'm sure that he wouldn't mind. Okay, great. And okay, so next we are moving on to.
Sorry, I see Amy has a hand raised. I don't know. I hope it wasn't a question for David, but really quick, if you want to say something, Amy.
Oh, thanks.
I just wanted to, I noticed that his case stated that there were people that within the community that were doing these crimes. So that's another big issue, that it's oftentimes, it's not people from outside of the community, it's people within the community. So that was one of the points that I got out from, I mean, we all have known this, but very good.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for the comment, and I'll make sure to pass that along to him as well. And so thanks, Amy. So next we're going to move on to our next item on the agenda. We have Vanilla, who is from the AG's office, who's going to be helping me talk about some of the logistics of bylaws that the Community Advisory Board Working Group is going to be meeting on. So I'll just back it up a little bit. So moving forward, since we have a full board now, we're going to start up with some working groups. So we'll be scheduling those in the next maybe few weeks. We'll send out a scheduler to see who's available when, and then put for some meetings around people's schedules so we can get the most attendance available, because I know everyone has different schedules and it's summer and people are traveling. And so I just wanted to announce that it'll go out there. And so once we get some scheduled dates on the books, then we'll have that on our website. And so I just wanted to give you a heads up that that'll be happening. But I wanted to invite Fanula to talk about a little bit more about the bylaws and how we operate as a advisory board.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you, and thank you for inviting me to come today. I am an attorney with the Attorney General's office. So the way it works in Colorado is all of the attorneys for the various state agencies are not actually housed in the state agency. They're housed in the Attorney General's office. So there's a unit of 3 attorneys, myself, Leah Pitcher, and Kelly Jedjick, who are the attorneys for the Department of Public Safety. And as part of that, one of our jobs is to help all of the boards and commissions and advisory groups that are housed within the Department of Public Safety. And there's a bunch of things that we do in that capacity. One, and partially I just wanted to introduce ourselves because we can act as counsel for advisory boards. So if you have legal questions, I know you have a great representative from the Attorney General's office, but he's not here as your counsel. He's here as to offer his substantive input. The public safety unit, we are actually the attorneys and counsel for the boards. So if you ever have a legal question that you want answered, you can reach out to us, and sometimes we can just provide a written answer. And then sometimes folks ask us to come to meetings so that we can, for example, you can hold under open meetings law, we can hold closed executive sessions to discuss legal questions and advice that you have. So we're always available to do that if you have any legal questions or need any assistance. Some of the other things that we do is help make sure that the boards and commissions are complying with statutory obligations that apply. So one of the things that every board and commission is supposed to do is to have written policies or bylaws. And it's actually, it's required by statute, but it's also actually really good practice. Well-written bylaws can help make your organization be more effective. It can help make sure that meetings run more efficiently, and that there is adequate time for everyone who wants to chime in and has something to say to chime in and have something to say. So we're sort of, I know this organization has been getting up and running, and so there's no written policies yet, but we're going to be working, I'll be working with Melody to help develop those boards and policies. And I think one of the things we had discussed is, having a smaller group of the organization who sort of can get together and think about what are the things that you want to have in your written policies. There's sort of, there's some standard things that are really good to have, like what constitutes a quorum, how many people have to approve something in order for it to be approved, and so on and so forth. And then some more details. And we don't have to talk about all those now because, of course, if you write written policies and bylaws, you all get a say in them and get to approve them. But we will be helping out with that and happy to help out with anything else as well.
Okay, thank you, Fanula, for the quick version of what we're going to be moving toward next in terms of the advisory board putting together their own bylaws. And I'm excited for that to happen soon. And again, the email will be going out for invitations to look at people's schedules to see what works best. So we'll schedule a few meetings, and also we will be presenting that to the next advisory board meeting, in the quarterly advisory board meeting. And briefing is also open to questions or her email if you have any additional questions about the bylaws from her perspective.
And I think I saw popped up in the chat. Now I'm like struggling to find the chat. Someone asked about, I would like to see if we can do an in-person meeting sometime. So that's the kind of thing that you can address in bylaws. For example, a lot of bylaws will say you have, most meetings are hybrid or, are telephonic, but the board shall endeavor to have one in-person meeting a year. That's something that you can decide to address in the bylaws. So it's exactly those kinds of like really good input into how do we want this board to function, that will be the bylaw process will help you all decide how you want the board to function.
Yes, and just to follow up, Delilah, we are planning an in-person meeting late fall and I know that's been an ask from this group for a while, and so we've finally reached a place where we have our office in order and we have more structure in terms of how we want to move forward. And so with the advisory board's input in terms of the bylaws, we have already been planning on having an in-person meeting at the end of later fall. So I'll keep in touch with you about that. Okay, thanks to Lyra. She said, great, I'm so excited for that meeting. So I think there's some people who are on a phone call. So thank you for that. And thank you, Fanila, for joining us, and I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. And let me know if you all have any questions or concerns about anything. We're always happy to help out. So nice to meet you all.
Okay, great. So we are reaching toward the end of our meeting, and I'll open it up to any community announcements anyone may have, and any meetings that might be happening or events or anything that you like to have people attend. I know that myself and just started out real quick, we are having a memorial, and it's a closed event, but I just want to let everyone know that we are remembering and having ceremony for Clarenda Blackburn's family, who was actually the first time when I got here was one of the first cases that we came across where she was an MMIP person who is from the Wind River Reservation and unfortunately became missing and was resulted in a homicide here in the Denver metro area. So we'll be respecting her and her family and having some time with them on Monday. And I'd like to thank Lynette Grable and Outer Natives Daughters, who has been involved to actively with the family and also helping me and assisting in how we can support them and recognizing and remembering her, and also continuing to improve the services to her family from state to state. So, Monica?
And I also want to thank Lynette for all of the work that she's doing to help honor Clarenda's family during this process. I also wanted to say that today is the anniversary of Odell Vest going missing from a house party in Toyac. He's been missing now for 25 years. He's been missing for longer than he was not missing at this point. He is, I think, officially considered a missing person case, but his family believes that after this amount of time that it's actually a homicide case. And we did just get a very small lead today, so we're excited about that, and we were able to pass that information along. Also today happening in Toyac is their yearly walk that they have to honor him and other MMIR folks. That's happening at 4:30 today. I don't think anyone here is probably going to be able to, well, maybe Chief Barrows, but most other people wouldn't have time to get to Toyac today. Just real quick, our task force has we're always doing something. We're always up to some work. Since our last meeting, we had the National Day of Awareness for MMIR. So we had 2 events, one in Ignacio and one here in Colorado Springs. They were both fairly well attended events. We've been able to get some new collaborations since then. We've also been working a lot with the city of Denver. For those of you who don't know who are on the call, the city of Denver has the largest amount of unsolved Native homicides across the state. And so we've been having very regular meetings with Denver law enforcement, Denver City Council, the Office of Social Equity and Innovation, the Office of Independent Monitor. They oversee, they're like I think the civilian oversight agency for the city and county of Denver, Department of Public Safety and other folks. We've been meeting pretty regularly, like at least once a month on that, trying to get some forward movement and some better practices in place. Trying to see what else have we been up to. We just had a search for a missing person out of Lakewood the other day. Lakewood PD told the family that they would not be able to issue a missing person report until they were gone for 3 days, which is obviously not accurate because Colorado does not have any policies that have a wait period on those. So we are thankful that CBI was also able to step in and advocate for that as well. We've had we've had 2 fusion meetings since the last advisory board. We had one in Colorado Springs, and I think the other one was in Ignacio. So, and that's been a collaboration with Southern Ute Police Chief Barrows, Melody, and our task force members, and then some other folks, like the assistant from the Attorney General's office in New Mexico. And our task force has been doing some heavy calls trying to get additional information regarding homicides that have taken place while in custody and additional deaths by law enforcement. About a little more than half of our task force was able to have lunch with Deb Holland in June, I believe it was, when she was in Denver. And we've just been partnering with a lot of Denver organizations and also doing trainings across the state. Daisy's been doing a lot of work down in the Four Corners area. And I think Raven had to jump off the call, so I'm sure that I am missing something, but we do have our newsletters on our website. We do them every other month. So they are on there. The May-June event newsletter is on the calendar now. And we are actively looking for volunteers. We have a long list of things that we could use assistance with. So if people want to volunteer with our task force, please reach out so we can schedule training. Thanks.
Thanks, Monica. Any other question, or no, not questions, excuse me. Any other events going on that everyone should know about?
I think Chief Barrow has.
Oh yeah, Chief Barrow, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Go ahead. I believe you're on mute. Yeah. Yeah, we're not hearing you.
Is that good?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right, good deal. Sorry. Hey, thank you for those who participated and came to the meeting in Colorado Springs on the 27th of June. Just for everyone's information here, there's a collaborative effort going on with a number of people from the Four Corners area, particularly with MMIR advisory boards, law enforcement, AG offices, and the like, in this effort to try to figure out how to create a Four Corners MMIR communications network. And just for everyone's information, the mission of that is to build a secure, culturally grounded virtual communication network that connects Native American tribes across the Four Corners area through real-time collaboration, trusted information sharing. We work to locate, unite, find loved ones with their families and bring resolution to MMIR cold cases. And the next meeting is scheduled for I think we had August 7th, but I wanted to talk to Melody about moving that to the 6th, Wednesday the 6th, and see if that was available on your schedule. I had a conflict there. But anyone on the call here who's interested in becoming part of this, to receive an invitation and a review of our last meeting and exactly where we are on this, please email me. I put my email in the chat, and I'll make sure that I include you on the invitation for our next meeting, which will be at the Southern Youth Police Department Justice and Regulatory Building in August. So, Melly, just if the 6th works for you, then I'll get that invitation out to Sweet.
I will check on that and get back to you after this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to piggyback off of what Monica was saying. So I'm Melissa McGough from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, investigative analyst. And I know there's a lot of legends and rumors going out that you have to wait 24 hours to report someone missing, or you have to wait a certain amount of time. And that is all false. I think that was something that was put out in the past, probably years and years ago. However, that doesn't exist nowadays. So there's not a certain amount of time that needs to pass, hours or days, for you to report a person missing. So I just wanted to get that out there to anybody who has heard that and thinks that's still true. That is not. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Melissa, for that, for the clarification. And we continue to educate the public about, that you don't have to wait. There's no waiting period. So thank you for that. And any other questions? Okay, so I know that it takes time to process some things. So if something comes up in your head after this meeting, or an idea or thought or comment, please share it with me so we can do a recap of this meeting in email, and I can address them also behind the scene. And I thank you all for taking your time. I know it's 2 hours is a lot, so I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the summer, and we are done for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.